How risky is this pick? I think you and I did a video about a month ago, and my premise was Kyle Shanahan's not going to play this safe. But the truth of the matter is, there's no such thing as safe in the draft. Anybody, Fields, risk, Mac Jones, risk. It's all a risk. But how risky is this? I think one thing that I don't want to say surprised me, but you start reading some draft analysis, and one thing everybody points out when they talk about the Niners pick is, and even Mel was very. I don't know if you saw Mel Kiper on Saturday, very adamant. Like, look, they just
you mean the Mel Kiper that's been on this podcast?
Yes, that Mel Kiper.
Yeah,
and he told us when he came on this podcast,
he'd come back.
He's a redshirt guy basically this year. He thinks he needs a year to develop. It's the fact they're the facts. He played one game this last year, FCS 17. Now, we bring it up, well, Mac Jones, not that many more games. But how risky do you think, just on paper, is the pick for the 49ers?
Okay, I'm about to say something that's going to sound pretty strong, but you got to put it into context. I'm not counting the 60s, 70s, 80s, and probably like 95 on. So the last 25 years, which AKA is John Middlecoff's life, from 10 on for me. I think it's the riskiest pick of my lifetime. And I think when you look back at the history of the league, and again, post Middlecoff's at 10 years old and on, this is basically unprecedented. If you just go back at the decade, think about some of the number one picks, right? Baker Mayfield, which was a very risky pick, 3-year starter at Oklahoma, and got dramatically better every year and was fantastic. Jameis Winston, Florida State national champion. Cam Newton, really, you'd say that has some parallels, right? Booted out of Florida, JC guy, 1-year starter for Auburn, national champion. And it was just
carried him.
Shit. Carried it, yeah. I mean, he did what Trey Lance kind of did with North Dakota State, but at Auburn. And he beat, obviously he beat Oregon, Chip Kelly, kind of in Chip Kelly's heyday, right? Beat them kind of by himself, him and Nick Fairley, but beat Alabama. So that those are like Cam Newton was risky in the sense that he was just a 1-year starter, but I don't think it parallels Trey Lance coming from a smaller school. I also think what you have to factor into is the trade. Remember when the Rams traded up to get Jared Goff, and they gave a lot, and the Eagles did too to get Wentz. Like those were two pretty. Wentz actually hadn't played that much at North Dakota State. Like he was a pretty risky pick too, and you could say that's been a little up and down.
But I will say this, like I remember coming into there, like he was somebody everybody was talking about. Now, I guess that would have been the case with Trey Lance if they had played this year too. Like we would have been talking about Trey Lance, right? But Carson was a guy that like Schefter, and clearly there was league buzz.
Well, guy, he's 6'5", and he's got a hose. I mean, obviously he's an elite prospect. And Jared Goff, I know he's kind of going through a rough stretch of his career, had been a 3-year starter at Cal, right? I mean, he had played a ton of games.
I thought, he came out after 3 years. He played as a true freshman.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He had been a 3 from the day he got there, and they were an explosive offense. So when you just look at the last decade, it's kind of produced a ton of quarterbacks going really high. Sam Darnold, the guy that went 3, he had only started 2 years, but he'd been really productive at a major school. Do you think I'm crazy for saying it's again of our adult lifetime? I don't know what happened in the 80s, but neither does anyone listening. So who gives a shit that it's the riskiest pick of the modern day NFL? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like part of things are risky. Like once upon a time, people put a lot of money in Facebook. Like that was risky. A lot of people turned it down. Apple. To me, when you draft, big upside quarterbacks early, it's kind of like a startup. You're swinging for the fence. And we've seen sometimes when you hit, Cam Newton's the best thing the Carolina Panthers have ever done, right? It changed their franchise. And I'm not trying to say that Trey is going to be as good as Cam. Obviously, the Niners want him to be, but they're different type players. But you get my point. Like his upside, like Baker's upside is limited. That's the one thing. The other part about Trey that's different from some of the guys, like Jared Goff's upside is limited. Like Carson's wasn't. I think that's why people pull out their hair, if you have any, when you watch Carson, is because you go, God, the ceiling is the roof of this guy. Same with Cam. That's where this guy falls under the category.
Yeah, I think the other thing that contributes to the risk is that it's one thing if you draft the higher ceiling guy over the lower ceiling guy, and you go, like if Justin Fields was not in this draft, and they just drafted Trey Lance over Mac Jones, we go, okay. But Justin Fields was in this draft. There was another really high ceiling guy in this draft.
That's part of it.
Much more college production at a much higher level than Trey Lance. right?
Yeah.
Like you, at the end of the day for the Niners, I do believe it was between Trey Lance and Mac Jones. That's what I think. And I think that's what a lot of people think. I think they've kind of alluded to it, but they did, whether they really investigated, really considered Justin Fields or not. He was drafted 11th, and he's going to play in the NFL now. So does he turn out Trey Lance to be better than Mac Jones? His ceiling? We'll see. Time will tell. We think so. We think it's a worthwhile risk, but he did also go ahead of Justin Fields. Like I think Baker was kind of risky. I do think that's a pretty risky one.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, he's short. He can't run. I mean, for sure.
He also would transfer. Now he had a lot of college production. Played for Lincoln Riley.
But here's the thing. Your college where you played at in your tape is your resume. But as we've seen for the history of the league, but just again back to our time, really consuming the league in the 90s, the last 2 decades, most successful quarterbacks have not come traditional. Started at the national power 3 years and then go on, be can't miss, like NC State, Cal, Brady goes 6th round, right? You just go Texas Tech, Josh Allen, Wyoming, just some recent guys. So part of basing it off of like Justin Fields played at Ohio State, that's great. You feel more comfortable, but as we've seen, that doesn't always. And I'm a Justin Fields guy, where I'm a BYU. He played 3 years, just because you have a lot of, playing time, production, that doesn't mean anything. It means something for the sense you feel better about when you make the decision, but it doesn't always translate, right?
Yeah.
Or the draft should be easy.
Yeah.
Because ultimately you're evaluating the human being, right? And a huge thing, they feel good about Trey. They feel good about, how could you not, about his plight to how he got here, right? Turning down, never giving up. Honestly, it has parallels of some of those guys. Wyoming, how he ends up there, how Russell says, screw you to NC State. Now, he's a higher level because he ends up at Wisconsin. But you get what I'm saying. Like, if
Aaron
you look
Rodgers,
back
junior
at
college.
The thing that kind of determines people's success at that position is like they get overlooked. It's not the easy path. And say what you want about Baker, even though he did transfer to Oklahoma, he had to walk on originally.
Yeah.
It wasn't like it was tough for him. He had to earn it.
Well, I do think part of what we're talking about, there's a difference when you start getting into the context of all that stuff you're saying versus on paper. Like, I think your comment about being the riskiest pick, like, I think a lot of that holds up on paper, right? Now, I also think this is why Kyle, the Monday before the draft, still looked like Kyle Shanahan knows, just because he didn't draft Mac Jones, the battle has only just begun. Like, making this guy into an NFL starter and a high-end NFL starter, like, that work has only just begun. But I do think they might feel more comfortable about this guy than other teams have felt about other picks that we don't view as risky, because of who he is, because of what they know of the way he played in college, the amount of responsibility he had on him in college, right? He played at a smaller school against lesser competition, but he might have had more required of him mentally than quarterbacks that played at bigger schools or played more games at bigger schools, right? He might have done a lot more of a certain type of skill than guys who played twice as many games at a bigger school, where they just, between the play call and the snap of the ball, they all turn and look at the sideline and then look back after the coach has waved the play into them, right? Like, so he actually might have more reps doing some stuff that's going to be required of him than guys that played more games at bigger schools. So my guess is when we dig in, like, to some of this stuff, I bet they feel more comfortable about him. I think they do. And we'll get into some of those things coming up. Then like, on paper, the resume leaves you with a lot of questions.
For sure. But to me, you go back to Mahomes. This is why every individual is their own story. Like what was happening at Texas Tech's offense, right? You look across, you throw a lot of screens. Really what they believed in was the person and the traits. Some guys, like what John Dorsey loved about Baker was like the gusto, the bravado, the cocky, the fucking leader of just the group, and just kind of his Favrean feel at Oklahoma. Like everyone sees and looks based on whether it's their own biases, whether it's their own belief in the way they want their players, and that's what they look for and hope that translates. And then the million other variables once you get to the league, right? Who's calling your plays? Who are you playing with? Who's your competition? Do you feel overwhelmed? Is there a negativity around you? Are the other guys in your draft class, you were passed up? Are you constantly getting asked about that? Is your franchise a dumpster fire? Is your franchise solid?
Well,
you get to sit.
You know what?
You get to
That's a good point. Let me interrupt you on that. if in 10 years, or let's say less, let's say in 5 years, Baker Mayfield is the starting AFC quarterback in the Pro Bowl, and they won the Super Bowl. The Browns won the Super Bowl the year before. This year they lost in the AFC Championship game. But let's say the two best quarterbacks in the league are Baker Mayfield and Trey Lance. Okay? I think in some ways you could say the fact that Baker did that in some ways is overcoming more NFL odds given what happened to him once he got to Cleveland. 3 coaches in 3 years? Like, Trey Lance is going to Kyle Shanahan. Baker Mayfield's on his 3rd coach. Well, now he's, now it's year 4. But, like, you could argue that is longer odds than what Trey Lance potentially is about to go through, where he's going to have Kyle Shanahan. This guy had two head coaches back-to-back years who are not in the league right now.
Well, is Hugh Jackson
is Freddie in the league somewhere?
Yeah, he's a tight end coach for the Giants.
Okay. Not calling plays.
No, but you're skipping a guy. He had an interim coach, Greg Williams, who's viewed as toxic. That's even fucking crazier. You're right. Baker's situation to overcome it if he does get good is really impressive. Trey potentially gets and I'm not saying this to diminish anything that he accomplishes, he does get a soft landing spot. Right.
Absolutely. It's this is what I saw. He said it. Like I'm pretty sure. I don't know how deep in the depth chart he's gone, but he's like, yeah, I got a Super Bowl roster around me. Now we'll see.
Well, you and I have talked about this and just texting around like with the agent community and just the draft community. All 3 guys, Mac, Justin, and Trey, their agent, their camps, we're angling. Hey, Kyle, what do you need us to do? You want us to film just drop backs all day? They did that. Whatever.
We'll send them to your coach. You want us to send them to John Beck? Done.
Yeah, you want us to film 8 to 5? You want us to film the night? You got a wide receiver to send us? What the fuck do you want us to do?
You want us to put a mask on him while he sleeps? You want some sleep study information?
Yeah, do you want
get that to you?
4 squares when we wipe or 3? Like, we'll do whatever it takes.
Rock, paper, scissors? We're there.
They're all angling to go there. So, like, which sometimes is very rare for a team drafting really high, right?
Yeah.
You just kind of go where you go and whatever. You don't angle to go like this is. You know why? Because wouldn't you see, if you're the agent, what just happened to like Mahomes and Josh Allen, how financial – Josh hasn't been paid yet. I mean, it might happen this offseason, might not, but he's going to get a lot. It changes your life. Like, remember that the Chiefs used the Mahomes camp to fend off everyone else and work with them. That's the best decision, that whole group, that really, because in fairness to Patrick or even Trey, they don't truly know what's going on. Like, it is a little bit on the agent to do whatever they say, get your guy there, give yourself the best long-term return on investment, which means playing the best / better you play, more you win, more money you make.
Right. And don't worry about getting drafted 7th instead of 10th.
Yeah, I do think you bring up a fair point. It is, Baker probably doesn't quite get the credit for just those first 2 years were a joke.
No, I give him a ton of credit. I give Stefanski a ton of credit. And we could find a lot of examples of that, right? Like, again, now we're talking about something different than the draft pick. But, I mean, the fact that Steve Young had success in his career, given what a shit show, how awful his career started in Tampa. They bring him in, then they draft Vinny Testaverde, then they try to trade him to the St. Louis Cardinals, who suck. And he's like, I'm not going there. Send me somewhere else. Gets to the Niners. And even then, it's like he's on the Niners, but he's trying to get himself traded, basically, because Joe's not going. I mean, we could. But you're talking about draft day, the unknown risk at the price they paid, at where they drafted him. I would venture to guess that if we went through the production historically among top 3 picks, this has got to be on the lower end of the spectrum.
Totally agree.